hello everyone. I mean, it's amazing on this chilly Monday morning to have so many people choose to join us. So welcome. I'm Rachel Lennon. I'm chair of the Queer Heritage and Collections Network, and I'm going to steer us through our fantastic speakers this morning. Just for a bit of context, for those who don't know the background of the network, we work to support heritage organisations and individuals across the UK to be more LGBTQ friendly and to share queer stories through places and collections. And if you're sitting at your desk or bed, sofa, wherever you find yourself to stay warm as you're listening along, and you'd like to find out more about the network, there's a lot more information on our website, and you can join as either an individual or an organisation. I think Cesare might do some signposting around that at the end of the session today. So this morning we've got around 2.5 hours to explore the theme of queer family friendly. Cesare, could you skip ahead to the slide? I think we've got a slide with our sort of agenda for the morning on. Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, so we've got about 10 minutes just to set the scene, settle in, sort of reflect on why we're here talking about this topic. And then we're going to have a bit of community voice from a Manchester-based charity called Proud to be Parents, which I think will be a good kind of, so scene set and get us in the right zone. Before we move on to Margaret Middleton, who's going to talk about creating queer museum content for children. We'll build a bit of a break in. Times will be relatively flexible. We'll see where we get to at that time, but we'll make sure that you have a chance to kind of run to the loo, grab another coffee, that sort of thing. And then we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive into a case study with the National Archives and some of their queer family friendly activities that they've been running recently before we wrap up and finish. So just a couple of kind of general notes on tone for the session. We're really keen for people to have the opportunity to ask questions. So you'll have noticed that you can't put your camera on or use your mic, but please do put your questions in the chat function or the Q&A function. If you have any issues, challenges, problems as we go along, stick them in the chat and Cesare will help troubleshoot in the background. Thank you, Cesare. And it's just great to have some live comments and questions for our speakers. So do stick them in there. Don't feel like you have to save them up, put them in as we go. So we've got a range of community and cultural sector voice today. And I just want to encourage everyone to be inclusive and sensitive around the theme and assume good intent within our discussions. And I think that's all the general sort of housekeeping things. Cesare, have I missed anything? You're nodding nice. That's, yeah, encouraging. Brill. And so we'll move on to that idea of scene setting. So we've joined by 2 other members of the network steering group today. So if you could put your cameras and mics open, Lauren and Yerje, to help explain how this theme session came about. There's obviously a huge range of topics that we're really keen to explore as a network. And the theme of family friendly emerged in a steering group meeting where we talked about all the kind of pressing issues and challenges in the cultural sector in this space. And I just wanted to share some of that discussion with you as we're kind of getting going this morning. So Lauren, I think I was going to come to you first just to ask if you could talk a bit about why the theme of queer family friendly was important to you when we were going through planning our programme for the year.
Great. Thanks, Rachel, and hi, everyone. So yeah, I mean, I speak from lived experience.
If you turn yours on, there we go.
Oh, sorry, a bit of feedback there. So I was just saying that I speak from lived experience, and the theme of queer family friendliness is really, really important to me, not just because of recognition of what queer families are being a global issue, but also that at that time my son was attending a nursery setting. It was he was getting a lot more perspective about what life was about. And I think Rachel and I had a discussion about our families and about how the sort of surroundings which surround our children can have a huge impact on them, including material culture. So just an example of that is my son would often return from home, and when we were playing, he would constantly talk about a very dominant kind of family narrative. So there's the mummy, there's the daddy. And I was questioning this quite sort of intently and questioning with the nursery setting about kind of why this might be. And we couldn't really find anything that was kind of they felt was standing out. They had a wide variety of books and they would constantly reference sort of different family shapes and structures. And it was only when I saw him out of the corner of my eye playing in a corner that I recognised that he was playing with a doll's house that only had a mummy and a daddy. And then, of course, when I then took that into kind of our world, the cultural sector, whenever we were visiting museums, I realised that the material culture that surrounded us was constantly referencing very dominant family narratives. So the collections, paintings, dolls' houses, and everything that we would interact with, in a sense, was very, very much plugging that sort of in his little mind. So it felt really important that we could address and discuss what representation looks like, what recognition looks like, and obviously that we can make a positive change within our sector to highlight the experience of queer families.
Yeah, thank you. That's so brilliant to hear. And yeah, we did have a lovely discussion, a real kind of empathy moment of kind of coming together. I remember feeling so excited just to have that conversation with you. And I think we'll hear from Matt a little bit about how important it is for parents of same-sex couples or queer relationships to have contact with others. And yeah, and it just can be so powerful and lovely. And I think Matt will talk a little bit around sort of isolation, risks of isolation around queer parenting. Really, really important things to remember. Yeah, I wondered, we had a much broader discussion as well in the network around queer families in the broader sense, and I wondered whether you could expand a little bit on that for us.
Good, yeah, absolutely, Rachel. Good morning, everyone. As with Lauren, this is very much my lived experience and also my partner's lived experience. Our experience is that we are the unofficial carers for our very elderly mothers. And I think that brings with it its own particular pressures and dynamics. Firstly, as older gay men, we're facing into, my partner's 60, we're beginning to face into the fact that at some point we will need a family around us to support us as well, a surrogate family in our case. But at the moment, we're balancing between looking after our elderly mothers, both of whom are in their 90s, and also trying to keep our careers and our jobs on track. So the pressures of that are quite acute, as one can imagine. But also, of course, the pressures that come along with not having children, that type of other support network, that other type of those other types of familial relationships that I think make our experience slightly more isolating in a way. The usual nuclear family is made up of two parents and children. It's less likely to be made up of two adult men and two elderly ladies who are in fact the parents. And I find that it's difficult in a way to see oneself reflected perhaps as a family unit, both in terms of in our sphere, in the heritage world, but also we don't see ourselves reflected, I think, more broadly in society. I think we're that sort of silent group of carers of a model of being a family that isn't really touched upon. Our experience isn't that often talked about, isn't that often explored. I'm sort of carrying the banner for the less conventional family, and I'm using conventional obviously in very big bunny ears here. The dynamic is, I suppose, interesting because we have become the parents to our parents now, and that I think raises some interesting questions as to how we represent that within a museum and heritage setting. We always love having archetypes that we can look back to, ancestors, particularly our community finds that really important. We like to see precedent, historic precedent. And I don't, that's an area I think that hasn't been looked at by us as curators, as historians, as people who engage with the past, and as queer people who engage with the past. And it's an area I think that it would help, I think, people like myself and my partner to see our presence reflected in what we do and how we approach history and heritage in within the museum. Um, I think that's sort of my as I say, my um, take on this is just expanding that idea of what it means to be family. It doesn't necessarily mean children and parents in whatever configuration that is. And particularly given, I think, the pressures now on receiving support from the state for looking after elderly people, I can see other queer individuals, such as my partner and I, being more and more within that position of having to pick up in looking after elderly parents. My other observation of this is also that I don't have I'm my mother's only child. But my partner has brothers and sisters who have conventional heteronormative relationships with children. And of course, the onus is on my partner, because he doesn't have children, to step in and pick up the care for his elderly mother. So again, I think that perhaps needs a little bit of unpacking and a bit of thought around how we can support individuals who are in that position, because it does seem very much that you're expected, if you like, expected to pick up the care if you are queer for your parent, because you don't have children. So that's, as I say, that's sort of a few points that are at the forefront of my mind, which perhaps on a Monday morning I haven't articulated terribly well, but that's sort of where I'm coming from in terms of engaging with queer families and our representation in the museum and heritage sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yasha, you were incredibly articulate and powerful and sensitive in those reflections. And both of you, thank you so much for joining. I think so many of us are bringing our own lived experiences and our own lives into our work, and they intersect in really powerful ways. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that. And it's so generous of you both to share your own stories to help set the scene and hopefully kind of bring forward some interesting questions and content today. So thank you so much. Lauren is also joining from LA, where it's the middle of the night. So thank you for that, Lauren. Thank you so much. Another thing that came up in our student group meeting was, and as we were sort of shaping this session, was an awareness of the ways in which the ideas of family friendly and queer friendly have been pitched against each other in the sector in sort of very recent years, and particularly the idea that family has been used to kind of shut down or oppose queer friendly experiences. And we really wanted to also explore that and kind of challenge that and challenge some of the assumptions within that. And as Yasha says, it's just about opening out. And that's, I think, what our speakers will do for us this morning. So we'll move on, bang on time. Thank you so much, Lauren and Yasha, to our Proud to Be Parents presentation, which I think Cesare will sort of key up for us. Proud to Be Parents is a community organisation that champions LGBTQ parents and carers in the UK. It's really unique in the UK and a national leader in advocating for queer families. And I first came across them in 2017 at the People's History Museum's Never Going Underground exhibition, where I saw children's drawings of their own families on the front of activity bags at the exhibition entrance. And that was around the time I was getting married and just starting fertility treatment for my family. And it was the first time I'd seen the family that I was sort of working towards represented in a cultural space. It was really powerful for me. They've done some really amazing work. we're about to hear from Matt Taylor Roberts, who's the founder and director of the charity. Matt was really sorry not to be able to join us live today, but had a prior commitment before we managed to reach out to him. So he's pre-recorded his presentation for us, so he won't be able to take live questions, but he's provided his email address and is happy to take questions sort of directly and afterwards. It's going to be about 25 minutes to set the scene from a community perspective, to build on some of the things that Yojay and Lauren have said there, and then we'll move on to our live presentations. So Cesare, could you set that up for us?
Welcome to my talk about creating an LGBT+ family-friendly space in museums. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the role museums and heritage organisations play in becoming truly LGBT+ family-friendly services. My name is Matt Taylor Roberts, and I'm the founder and managing director of Proud to be Parents, a not-for-profit organisation dedicated to supporting LGBT+ parents, carers and their families. Today, I wanted to highlight two essential points. LGBT+ families exist and they remain an unrepresented community. Museums and heritage organisations can play a vital role in supporting families just like mine by addressing these gaps and creating spaces where all families feel welcomed and represented. I also want to recognise within our audience there's a broad range of experiences and confidence in this area. Some may be knowledgeable and familiar, while others are just beginning this work. It is valuable to acknowledge this diversity as our journey towards building more inclusive spaces. I am sorry that I can't be with you today, but I hope you find this pre-recording useful. And if you do have any questions, please reach out to me. My email address is matt@proudtoparents.co.uk. As LGBT+ families, we face unique challenges when navigating public and cultural spaces that still often revolve around traditional mum and dad models. Despite some progress, assumptions about family are still heavily shaped by straight, cisgendered norms. This can make spaces feel unwelcoming or even downright uncomfortable for families like ours. Whether we are formed through pregnancy, adoption, fostering, co-parenting or surrogacy, too often we feel ourselves overlooked or even worse, made to feel invisible. This shows us just how important it is to make an inclusive, individually centered approach that doesn't just claim to be welcoming, but truly makes everyone within our families feel seen, respected and valued. In the UK, our visibility as LGBT+ families is growing, which is really encouraging. Today, there are around 217,000 same-sex families in the UK, a huge leap from 16,000 in 1996. This data, however, is not truly inclusive of all LGBT+ families, as it only represents those that are in civil partnerships or marriages that have gone through the adoption or IVF/pregnancy routes, and therefore we know there are many more within the UK. However, this data is real progress and it reflects how far we've come, but it also reminds us of how much more work is still needed to support families like ours in every space we enter. In 2023, around 1 in 5 adoptions in the UK were to same-sex couples, a meaningful step forward, yet this data highlights how crucial it is to have equal access to resources, services and support. True inclusion means ensuring that spaces meet our diverse needs and don't just welcome us in theory, but in meaningful practice. But even with this positive shift, LGBT+ families still face real challenges every day. Research shows that more than half of LGBT+ families have experienced negative comments or attitudes about their family. In a recent survey by Just Like Us, almost 50% of lesbian and gay parents share concerns about their children being bullied. These aren't just hypothetically worries, these are real fears that carry with us and that directly impact our daily lives and where we attend and the recreational activities we do. Adding to this, hate crime and discriminatory behaviour against families, which has been on the rise, adds to the real challenges that face LGBT+ families day in, day out. What's also concerning is that while our visibility as LGBT+ families is growing, the UK has been slipping in the international rankings for LGBT equality. The UK has dropped 17 places in its rankings since 2014. So while society may seem more inclusive on the surface, we still have significant work to do to ensure that LGBT+ families feel fully supported, respected and safe in every aspect of their lives. In fact, it is estimated that around 6 children from LGBT plus families are in every nursery and school across the UK, and yet public and cultural spaces like museums and heritage sites don't always consider what it takes to make these environments generally welcoming to families just like ours. Creating an inclusive space goes merely beyond acknowledging that our families exist. It means actively creating environments that make us feel welcome, belonged, and part of the exhibit. It's about all of us, parents, children, and families, feeling seen, feeling supported, and being welcomed. Creating truly inclusive and supportive environments starts with understanding and addressing unconscious bias and microaggressions, which are behaviours or assumptions that are unintentionally hurt or exclude others. Unconscious bias is something that we all have, shaped by our own personal experiences, beliefs, and values. It influences how we think and act without us even realising it, sometimes leading to snap judgments that may not be fair or accurate. For example, unconscious bias might mean that we'd be more likely to view someone similar to ourselves in a positive light, or we might unknowingly think less of someone who seems different. It can also involve making assumptions based on stereotypes or preconceived ideas about a person or a group of individuals. These biases can affect our behaviours and decisions, like who we feel comfortable around, who we think is capable, or even how we treat others in social or professional settings. Microaggressions are related issues. They are small, often unintentional comments or actions that can make people feel uncomfortable, judged, or excluded. These can be things like questioning someone's background because of their accent, assuming someone's role based because of their gender, or making a joke based on the stereotype. Even though these actions might seem minor or harmless, they can add up over time and have a significant impact, especially on people who experience them frequently. By recognising and challenging our own biases, we begin to be mindful of our microaggressions, and we can start to build more welcoming and inclusive environments. This awareness helps us to treat people fairly and make sure everybody feels valued and respected. Addressing these behaviours is an ongoing process that takes effort, but it's key to creating spaces where everyone feels like they can belong. For many LGBT plus individuals, navigating a world that often assumes everybody is straight and cisgendered means dealing with frequent, sometimes daily microaggressions and unconscious bias. Microaggressions are small but powerful comments or actions, often unintentionally, that carry negative or dismissive messages. Even though each one might seem minor or harmless on its own, the impact they have can add up over time and take a real toll on people's mental and physical well-being. Research shows that experiencing microaggressions regularly can lead to mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and trauma, and it can even cause physical problems like high blood pressure. Because of this, it's so important for organisations to educate their staff on recognising and preventing microaggressions and unconscious bias. By understanding the harm these behaviours cause, staff can help create a safer, more respectful space for LGBT plus individuals and their families. Microaggressions come in 3 main types, each affecting people in different ways. There's the micro assault. These are openly harmful comments or behaviours, though they are often indirect. This could include someone making offensive jokes, using hate speech, or avoiding someone because of their identity. These actions are more direct forms of discrimination, but are sometimes disguised as jokes or just the way things are. Micro insults are more subtle and often distinguished by comments or innocent questions, but they are still said in a negative and stereotypical messages. For example, telling someone you don't look gay or asking LGBT parents who's the mum and who's the dad suggests that there are only certain kinds of relationships or appearances which are acceptable. Another example is assuming that a child in an LGBT family is missing out on something that they're not having from a traditional family structure. Micro-invalidations dismiss or ignore someone's identity, feelings, or experiences. These can be things like telling someone that they are being too sensitive or overreacting, which dismisses their real feelings and experiences. For LGBT plus families, it can mean someone assuming that there's a mum or a dad at home, or telling them that their concerns don't matter. In a world that still is largely shaped by heteronormative and cisnormative views, LGBT plus families face these kinds of challenges every day. For LGBT plus parents and carers, this often means feeling the need to come out again and again in different spaces to represent their family openly and positively. It also means continuously reading the room for signs of safety and acceptance, considering how much of their personal lives they can share, and sometimes preparing their child to respond to a bias or question they may encounter about their family structure. We know from our own research that 50% of our families are not out when accessing recreational activities outside of school or going on school holidays to ensure the protection of their family from discrimination or LGBT phobias. It's worth reflecting on this as we move forward to our next bit. Creating inclusive spaces, especially those that openly affirm LGBT identities, brings out the best in both employees and visitors. When staff members feel comfortable and confident being their true selves, they are more likely to feel connected, engaged, and creative in their roles. This authenticity benefits everybody. Employees are happier and more productive, and visitors feel the warmth of genuine, welcoming environments. Research shows that a workplace where people feel that they can be themselves leads to more engagement and new ideas. When employees come from diverse backgrounds and feel valued for who they are, they bring unique perspectives to their work. This diversity can enhance programs, bring fresh ideas, and help teams think outside the box when problem solving. For museums and heritage sites, this means richer exhibits, more dynamic storytelling, and creativity programs that speak to a broader audience. Inclusivity isn't just important for staff, it's essential for visitors too. When people walk into a museum or heritage site and see that this space is for all identities and everybody is celebrated, they're more likely to feel comfortable, open, and ready to connect with stories and exhibits. This is essentially important for LGBT visitors who often feel uncertain about whether a space will welcome them and their family. Knowing that a museum or heritage site values a diversity allows them to engage fully and enjoy the experience authentically. Today's visitors are increasingly looking for organisations with a clear commitment to inclusivity and a purpose. In fact, 86% of visitors report that they are more likely to support a business that stands for something meaningful. Half of visitors say they'll choose, support, or avoid organisations based on their social values. This means that for a museum or heritage site, developing inclusivity isn't just a nice to have, it's an essential part of building a loyal visitor base. When visitors see an organisation's value diversity, they're more likely to return, share positive experiences, and recommend it to others. By creating a space that welcomes and respects every identity, museums and heritage sites can make a powerful impact. Not only just inclusivity, but a welcoming environment for visitors, but it also builds long-term loyalty, engagement, and makes spaces more vibrant and successful for years to come. Here are 5 practical ways your organisation can start creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment for LGBT+ families and visitors. Firstly, inclusive language and imagery. Review the language used in exhibits, forms, signs, marketing material to make sure it reflects a broad range of family structures. Small changes like saying grown-ups or having pronouns on name tags go a long way in showing that all kinds of families and identities are welcome. Displaying imagery of diverse families, including LGBT+ families, on websites, posters, and brochures also signals to visitors that your space is open and inclusive for everybody. Secondly, queer history throughout the exhibits. Instead of limiting LGBT history to Pride Month or LGBT History Month, aim to include these stories throughout your programming and exhibits. By embedding LGBT+ narratives into broader histories, you're normalizing this identity as a natural part of human story. For example, including stories of same-sex couples, gender diverse individuals, or influential LGBT+ figures in history exhibits helps all visitors see that these stories are woven into how our world has been shaped. Staff training and inclusivity. Equip your staff with training on topics like unconscious bias, microaggressions, and the unique dynamics of LGBT plus families. This training helps staff build confidence and awareness in welcoming diverse families. It also gives them skills to handle any awkward situations with sensitivity and respect, which can make a huge difference in how comfortable all visitors feel. Fourthly, dedicated events for LGBT plus families. Create events specifically for LGBT plus families, such as a family-friendly tour, workshops, or storytime sessions. By hosting these events, you're providing a safe and supportive environment where LGBT plus families can engage with the space and each other. It's a wonderful way for families to feel seen and celebrated. It also gives them a chance to connect with other families who share similar experiences. And fifthly, addressing social isolation and building community connections. Many LGBT plus families face social isolation, especially in traditional family spaces where they may feel like they're the only ones or they can't be out within that place. Exclusive events and programming focusing on diverse family structures can help bridge this gap, giving families a space where they feel that they belong. By hosting events that celebrate family diversity, not only are creating memorable experiences, but you're also helping to build a supportive network among families who may feel otherwise isolated. By implementing these practices, your organisation can create a truly welcoming environment where LGBT plus families feel valued and respected. These efforts not only enrich the visitor experience, but also develop a sense of community and connection that keeps people coming back. Inclusivity isn't just about welcoming everyone through the door, it's about making sure everyone who enters feels at home and equitable. At Proud to Be Parents, we have seen how co-production can bring about authentic representation for LGBT plus families. Our collaborations with the People's History Museum on the Unseen Community and the Never Going Underground projects are prime examples of this co-production and how it works successfully. The Unseen Community exhibit at the People's History Museum in Manchester was created in collaboration with Proud to Be Parents and the Artist Alley crew. It was a powerful photographic journey that explored both the discrimination faced by LGBT plus parents and carers and the joy and resilience of family life. Over a decade, Proud to Be Parents has worked with LGBT plus families who have generously shared their personal stories, challenges, triumphs, and everyday moments. We use these stories to support our desire to capture authentic images of family life within the LGBT plus parent and carer community. In creating this exhibit, we prioritise co-production, collaborating directly with LGBT plus parents, carers, and of course their children, to authentically represent their lives. We then created an inclusive and welcoming space within the museum, which showcased the warmth and diversity of family life while challenging assumptions and stereotypes around family structures. LGBT families are too often facing unique challenges and can experience isolation due to limited inclusivity of family-based services, which frequently overlook the needs of non-traditional family models. Through this exhibit, we aim to greater build awareness, understanding, and celebrate these unseen communities. The Unseen Community exhibit was a family-friendly experience with opportunities for children to play, draw, and create their own family to greater embed our similarities across family structures. It continuously remains available online for those who wish to explore our images and what we did. Our involvement in the Never Going Underground exhibit marked the 50th anniversary of the 1967 Sexual Offences Act, honouring 6 decades of LGBT plus activism. Within this family-friendly programme supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund, it ran from February to August in 2017. This programme featured interactive workshops, storytelling, music and crafts to engage all ages. We had the likes of Ollie Pike, who did inclusive tales like Prince Henry, Jamie and Princess Penny and the Pea, which explored themes of love, determination and acceptance. We had workshops led by Matt Hill, which were creative sessions with children to celebrate music's role in activism and self-expression. We also had things like treasure hunts, dream catchers and identity boxes, which allowed our families to participate in activities that developed creativity and self-reflection. These sessions were shaped by community input. From June to September in 2016, we developed workshop ideas to enhance awareness of LGBT+ history. This included creating molly spoons, identity boxes and banners, all with historical context. For example, molly spoons referenced early LGBT+ social spaces known as molly houses, symbolising new beginnings. By October, we had begun trialling these workshops with proud-to-parent families to ensure that they would resonate with the wider public and be reflective of what our families would think that should be delivered within a family-friendly, LGBT+ representing space. To further amplify the voices of children within the LGBT families, we used their drawings of their family units on promotional artwork, family-friendly materials and treasure hunt bags to ensure that the children's perspectives and unique messages and images were integrated into the Never Going Underground project. These initiatives show that co-production goes beyond consultation. It's about building genuine partnerships that bring authentic representation and empower families to feel seen, valued and understood. We invite everybody to stay engaged through our website and social media channels, where we continue sharing resources and up-and-coming opportunities which can maybe resonate with what you're doing within your spaces. As a cultural institution, museums and heritage organisations are in a unique position to stand against the growing wave of anti-LGBT+ discrimination. Today, as hate crimes and debates around LGBT+ rights and education become more intense, it's more important than ever to create spaces where LGBT+ families feel safe, valued and respected. These institutions have the power to show support through programmes, language and practices that truly celebrate LGBT+ experiences rather than pushing them into the margins. For example, consider a typical family day event. If the activities, language or setup assume a family consists of a mum, a dad and kids, this can unintentionally make LGBT+ parents and carers feel out of place or excluded. For families with, say, 2 mums or 2 dads, or trans or non-binary parents, or any other structure, this traditional model doesn't reflect their reality and can make them feel invisible. But by designing family programs that are intentionally inclusive, where all kinds of families and identities are recognised and embraced, museums and heritage sites can create spaces that welcome everybody. Inclusive programming can make a big difference. Events that highlight diverse family histories, feature LGBT+ figures in history, or host inclusive family workshops show that LGBT+ experiences are valued and part of the broader human story. By making these stories visible year-round and not just during Pride months or relevant other awareness days or events, cultural institutions show their commitment to inclusivity as a core value. The need for supportive spaces is essentially high now, as many LGBT+ families face social isolation or feel unwelcome in certain public areas. Museums and heritage sites have the power to create a space where these families feel safe and supported. By actively designing inclusive programs, using welcoming language and promoting diverse stories, cultural institutions can help shift the conversation towards acceptance and understanding. This work isn't just about welcoming LGBT+ visitors, it's about creating an environment where every person from every background feels genuinely at home within your space. As leaders and caretakers of cultural spaces, you have the special opportunity to expand how we see and understand families. By reshaping family representation to include everybody, you're helping to change old and narrowed out ideas, actively supporting LGBT plus families in what makes a real difference. Instead of keeping LGBT families on the sidelines, you can bring their stories and experiences and contributions into the core of what your space offers, reflecting true diversity of our society. This isn't just about a nod to inclusivity, it's about recognizing that LGBT plus families are vibrant, important, and deserve spaces where they feel safe, respected, and celebrated. When LGBT plus families walk into a museum or heritage site and see themselves reflected, it creates a powerful sense of belonging. It tells them, you're welcome here, your family story is valued. And by welcoming these families, you also open the door to broader social change, showing the wider public that diversity is an essential part of our shared history. Recognising and supporting LGBT plus families is a key step forward to creating truly inclusive, welcoming environments for everybody. Your organisation is uniquely positioned to be a leader in this area, setting an example of what it means to create spaces that feel like home for all kinds of families. This commitment to inclusivity doesn't just benefit LGBT plus families, it enriches the experiences of all visitors by showing them every story matters. Thank you so much for taking part in today's discussion and being here to explore these ideas. I hope our discussion has inspired you to see how your organisation can play an essential role in making all families feel valued and welcomed. If you'd like to learn more about what we do at Proud to Be Parents, please reach out and see our social media pages and our website www.proudtobeparents.co.uk, and please don't hesitate to reach out. Together we can make sure that every family feels at home in our cultural spaces. Thank you again for your time and commitment to inclusivity. To stay updated with our activities and get involved with your family, visit our website or follow us on social media, and don't forget to register for our monthly newsletter. We look forward to seeing you at our next meetup. Until then, take care. We'll see you soon.
That's great. Thank you, Cesare. And thank you again to Matt for taking the time, even with a diary clash, to contribute to our discussion and do a bit of scene setting for us. That recording will be shared with all of the presentations on the Queer Heritage Collections Network website after today. We're now going to move live to Margaret Middleton. So Margaret, who I'm sure many of you will know, is an independent exhibit designer and museum consultant, also based in Manchester. So with nearly 20 years of experience in the museum field, they work at the intersection of design and social justice. Middleton developed a popular family inclusive language chart and consults with museums on implementing inclusive practice with special focus on children, gender minorities and queer people. We're really lucky to have Margaret with us today, and I'm excited for their presentation. Margaret is with us live. Please remember to post your questions for Margaret in the chat. I'll run through them and share them with Margaret at the end of their presentation. So over to you, Margaret.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. I am excited to be part of this conversation. This is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm going to share some slides with you, and I'm going to focus on how to, like, the strategy for talking about this with colleagues, because to me, that's been one of my biggest hurdles in the work that I do as an exhibit designer. And I want to break down some of those arguments that might be used against us, and to think about how to combat those and reframe the narrative and really kind of, create really meaningful spaces. I think what Matt was talking about active welcoming, I think is so important. I really appreciated that framing, because I think, like Matt talked about, like it goes beyond acknowledging, and it's this welcome is an active thing. It's not just simply letting everybody in the door. So my presentation today is family friendly, queer museum narratives, and the family audience. So I'm going to be talking specifically about the content of the exhibits, because I think we've got already a really excellent baseline for talking about what it feels like to welcome queer families from a facilities sort of standpoint. So let's look at the content. So just a little bit more about me. I am primarily an exhibition designer. My background is in industrial design, and I spent the first 10 years of my career in children's museums. So those are the folks who I get the most excited about in museums, people under 10 years old. And that really inspires me and drives, what I do in my career. I also work as a museum consultant, so I do trainings for museum staff members, and a lot of that is around, like Rachel mentioned, the family inclusive language chart. I train on inclusive language and consult on style guides for thinking about language and presenting queer content in museums. And I also write about museum practice. So at the end, I'll share a link. So if there is anything that I talked about that you're wanting to learn more about, I may have some more writing about it. In fact, this particular presentation is based on a book chapter, which I'll give you a link to at the end. The reason I do that is because I find that when I'm making an argument, and when I say an argument, like I'm really talking about case making, like how am I being persuasive and trying to change practice or move practice in a different way. And so advocating for queer inclusive museums, it does involve that case making, that argumentation. And something that I find is really helpful is, especially if I'm in-house, which I haven't been for a long time, but I from what I understand, my colleagues like find this really helpful, is being able to move the conversation away from an individual. So if I'm bringing a new concept to somebody at work, I can point to scholarship or research that someone else has done, and it can take some of the pressure or the focus off me as an individual worker. So anyway, I really recommend citation as a way to get around that, because especially for those of us who are queer who are doing this work, it can really it can put like a lot of pressure and visibility on us in ways that are really uncomfortable, and can get it can feel really personal real quick. So any way that you can lean into community and citation, I think, is some ways to help beat some of that fatigue. Anyway, the question that I want to start with is, what does it mean to be family friendly? This is a word that gets used in museums a lot, this phrase, family friendly. What do we really mean by that? I would love to actually, let's pop these into the chat. What do you mean? Or what do you think of when you think of like a family? If somebody says there's a family friendly exhibit or a family friendly program, what does that mean? And I'm really talking about like what do we mean by that professionally? Not necessarily like what ideally we're thinking. So okay, great. We've got some things in the chat going. Wow, okay. So we've got interesting to children and adults, nothing controversial. intergenerational, child accessible programming, suitable for children. What a loaded term that one is, right? Suitable for children. That comes with a lot of assumptions. Activities for little kids, suitable for all ages, child friendly, avoiding adult content. That's another one, right? Like, what is adult content? Appropriate for varied ages, skill levels and access, coloring in sheets. Boy, oh boy. Yeah. I mean, I love to color, but I would, as a children's museum professional, I would love to see us expand our idea of what of the coloring in sheet. Uh, child friendly, something that's aimed at children, for children, age appropriate, suitable for parents, grandparents, children. Lots of child friendly. So great. This is exactly what I think of too. I think this is our code word, family friendly is this code for, it's for kids. Spoiler alert, I am going to focus on children for my presentation, but I would love it if we as a field could start moving away from family friendly as a code word. Because honestly, like, even when you say something is for kids, like, who are we talking about? Children as a legal term is anybody under 18, and that's a wide variety of development phases. I do a lot of work with babies and toddlers, and they have very different needs than even a 6 or 8-year-old. When we're talking about children, we have to be really specific about who we're talking about, and to think about, like, a school group is a very different thing than a family visit too. So anyway, all of that to say is, like, this word is like, this phrase family friendly is kind of almost meaningless. It comes with a lot of assumptions about, like, appropriateness, and I think we've got to unpick that. So the next time somebody says, like, I need you to develop a family friendly exhibit, program, whatever, I think we gotta get in there and be like, great, love that. What do we mean by that? Because, like, as was said earlier, family can mean so many different things, and what a bummer, honestly, to say, instead of saying, like, we're focusing this programming on 6 to 8-year-olds and their caregivers, is really different than saying it's family friendly and excluding, somebody in their 50s who is caregiving for their own parents, right? Like, that's a very different family experience. And we need a family friendly experience that's welcoming to all of those different families, right? So anyway, all that to say is, like, I love thinking about children in museums. That's what I'm going to focus on today. But we've got to explode that. And I'm appreciating somebody mentioning that the imagery that goes with family friendly. It's so often that, like, like the family bathroom icon, you've got, like, little stick man and little stick woman with, like, little stick baby in between them. Like, yeah, we we gotta get away from that one. And by get away from, I really just mean, like, let's, like, just unpick it, interrogate it, like, talk about it, get into it, rather than letting these words, kind of go unchallenged. All the assumptions go unchallenged, the assumptions behind the words. So I'd like for us to be thinking about, like, who are we intending family programs for? And maybe is there a better way to talk about those programs that's more specific? And being more specific does not necessarily mean that you're, like, excluding anyone. You're just being honest about who you're thinking of when you're creating a program. It's okay to make targeted programs. And they'll probably be more successful if you've got a specific audience in mind anyway. So this last piece, what subject matter is family friendly? That's what I'm going to speak about today. So Lauren mentioned the idea of a dominant narrative, and I want to put, like, a really fine point on that. So here, this is a paraphrased example of a phrase that I hear from my colleagues. And sometimes it's not put quite so bluntly, but this is the sentiment. We can't have queer exhibitions because our museums serve school groups and families. Families being code for heterosexual families with children under 10, I think. That's my assumption there. And what goes along with the assumption, right, is like that these groups don't want queer content. So anyway, if that's the dominant narrative, how does that manifest? That's what I'll be going through some of these other arguments, these like challenges that I've come up against. And then I'll give you a few strategies for each of those arguments, I'll bring counter arguments, and then I'll finish up with some ways that we can actually, instead of just speaking back to this dominant narrative, creating new narratives so that we can think about, we have this vision together. We can create a new vision for the queer family friendly museum of the future. So we've got to first combat this narrative and think about like the ways that it manifests. I'd like to start with this quote from Jules Gill Peterson. This is from her book, Histories of the Transgender Child, which came out in 2018. I really appreciate the way that she gets at this, like goes right to the heart of this. She writes, children, by design, deprived of civil rights and infantilized, are easy targets for political violence, just as easily, it turns out, as concerned adults can claim them for protection. She's getting at this phenomenon that happens that can like chill any argument where it's like, think of the children, think about, because we all care about, like, I mean, we have hearts. We care about children. We were all once children. We know what that's like to be so vulnerable. And this political strategy of shutting down change this is really effective. It's really effective to hide behind children or the supposed interests of children. So I want to start there because it's this emotional argument that we can get over, but it can have this chilling effect when you encounter it, because like, how do you argue with that? But there are many ways to argue about with it once we get over that initial shock. So here are some of the arguments that kind of stem from this political phenomenon. The first one, we need to protect the children. So this idea of protection, like some of the things that were coming through in the chat were about appropriateness or safety. This is really based on the idea of the homophobic idea of the predatory queer, that this is dangerous and threatens your safety. And as we're seeing, as we've seen in history and now, this has dire consequences. There are very real consequences, real restrictions on LGBTQ people's livelihoods, families, bodily autonomy. All of it is all under threat, based on this emotional argument that is based in homophobia. I really like this image. This is from an anti-Section 28 protest in Manchester, and this is the gay youth group, which I really like, because this is youths who are advocating on behalf of other young people, and saying that that one of your children could be gay. The idea that children might be gay, I think is it kind of blows that out of the water, right? Like the idea that children need to be protected from queerness. And as obvious as that probably sounds to most of you, it is something that needs to be said when arguments like this come up, because they have too much power when they're left unchallenged. I'm gonna move on to this next of the three arguments. You're confusing the children, right? Like it's confusing that somebody might change genders or that they might be gay. So of course we know many children have queer friends and family members. Some children themselves are queer, like we just talked about. Something else though that I would like to put into this, because I think hopefully you've got those in your arsenal already for speaking back to this particular argument that it's confusing to children. This other piece is, what's wrong with being confused? I mean, isn't that part of life and learning? Something in children's museums, there's this great bit of research that I get really inspired by, is that there's a phenomenon in science learning called confounded evidence. And the idea being that, like, if you're using an interactive exhibit and you're getting a response, like you're putting in an input and you're getting an output that you didn't expect. So much of science learning is making predictions, trying something out, seeing what happens. When you get an unexpected output from one of these experiences, children are much more likely to spend time with that experience because they want to figure it out. It's actually a great mode of engagement. We actually aim for confusion, productive confusion in children's museum experiences for that reason. So confusion is good, actually, is I think the most actually important thing to get out of this one. And then this last argument, gender and sexuality are inappropriate topics for children. We talked about adult content versus child-friendly content in the chat earlier. We talk about gender and sexuality with children all the time. It's not that I would love for us to change our argument, I guess, rather than saying there's nothing sexual about LGBTQ content. No, there is something sexual about it. It's called a sexuality for a reason, right? Gender and sexuality are inexplicably linked. And it's I don't think that argument works because everybody knows that that's not true. The fact is that straight and cisgender people have genders and sexualities as well. They're just presented as normal. So rather than saying, oh, there's no sex here, there's actually sex everywhere. And there's plenty of gender and sexuality content that we've already deemed, as a society, we've already deemed as totally appropriate to discuss with children. It's a double standard that when we're talking about queer genders and sexualities, that suddenly those become inappropriate. So maybe challenging to talk about, but I think it's worth going there, because I think that our argument that queer stuff is not related to sex, I think is not helpful. It's not doing us any favors. All right. So those are those three arguments that come up a lot. You may find that they don't come in such straightforward I guess, blunt ways that people can kind of use more flowery language, I guess, to get at these same ideas. Something that I find really helps is if you think somebody is making one of these arguments, you can ask them to just explain themselves a little bit more. And what you'll often find, what I often find when I do that, is that when people need to like get more explicit about what they're talking about, like really spell it out. What is it that you're saying here? We come to one of these 3 arguments eventually, because they're what's behind some more vague language. But ask for clarity. What do you mean by that? It's totally also, I mean, there's always a chance that maybe that's not actually what they mean at all. Vague language can go either way. So you may luck out. It may turn out that somebody is actually being an ally. They're just being vague or clumsy. So ask questions, ask for more. All right, so changing the narrative. Rather than just combating these arguments as they come up, let's get out ahead of it, create new narratives about what it means to be family friendly, what it means to be child friendly. I think these points Matt actually pointed to earlier, but I'll just reiterate. People come to museums to learn about other people. So straight and cisgender people it's very relevant for them to learn about queer people. And lesbian, gay, and bisexual museum visitors report feeling a sense of affirmation when they're seeing their communities represented. There's not enough data out there for trans visitors. If anybody is out there looking for PhD topics, I think that's that's one that we need more data on, not because we don't know that representation is important, but that it really helps to have the data to back it up. So it's relevant for everybody. And I'm going to use this example of an exhibit that I designed for Boston Children's Museum in 2015 to illustrate the 3 points that I'll finish up with. This is called Mimi's Family. It's a photography exhibit about a family in the Boston area with a transgender grandparent. And all of the photos are hung at kid height, meaning like average height or average eye height for a 6 to 8-year-olds. And in addition to the photographs, there are questions that go along with each one of them that help direct the conversation back to the visitor and their family or whomever they're visiting with. There's a reading corner for, we had a library of books available for children to read with their caregivers, all about gender and sexuality that were really aimed at their particular age group. I think that one way to talk about when we talk about child friendly is developed for this developmental phase or stage. I think can be a way to get away from maybe some of the more emotionally charged ideas of what it means to be child friendly. If you say this was developed for 5-year-olds, for example, that's a very different thing to say. And it means that you're thinking about where somebody's at developmentally rather than this sort of like broad idea of what's good for the children, right? So anyway, that's a tip for you. And then in the back of the room, there was a place where children could draw pictures of their family. We were mostly working with pre-writers. So most of the responses to our guiding question, tell us about your family, came in the form of drawings. So that's a little bit of background about this exhibition, and I'll use examples from what we did as ways to create counter narratives. This first one, sharing stories. This is that talk back space that I was telling you about. Tell us about your family. You see all of these like wonderful kid drawings of family members and houses and pets and gardens. This is a familiar. Oh, and then this other, you know, I was telling you about the library with the books to read together. Reading together is a very familiar adult-child dynamic. It's something that families are doing together already, and you can kind of leverage that familiarity and comfort level. This is also, I use research from the Family Learning Initiative. This is out of the USS Constitution Museum, which I feel like a little conflicted about the fact that like some of my favorite research around social learning is coming out of a battleship museum. But anyway, it's good stuff. You can't argue with it. What they talk about with family learning is about leveraging relationships that are already that are already there. So children don't come to the museum alone. They're coming with caregivers who they have a past and a future with, and that really helps with learning. So we really leaned into those relationship dynamics with the questions that go over each of the photographs on display. For example, we have a picture of reading bedtime stories together, and the question is, what stories are important to your family, I think. And that is a natural conversation starter between a caregiver and a child. They can talk about what favorite bedtime stories they have, or maybe, you know, if they like to tell stories around the campfire or something, or make up stories together. It's very open-ended, but it's a way to reflect, make meaningful connections between what they're seeing in front of them and their own lives. And the other piece is when I say like this relationship has a future as well. This is something that they're going to remember and talk about. Remember that time we went to the museum and we saw those pictures, or we drew those pictures together. So that's what family learning is really all about. It's really social learning. You can imagine that working with any relationship that's already established, who you're going to the museum with. And then this piece here, the talk back board, tell us about your family. It's all about reflection and making those meaningful connections. So sharing stories is a great way to make this content really relevant for audiences of all ages. This next piece is about resources. So we've got children's books in the space that all relate to what we're talking about in the exhibit. We also provided some books for grown-ups and a glossary to help, because grown-ups tend to facilitate the experience of their children. That's one of the roles that grown-ups find familiar and comfortable. So one of the ways to help them in that role that they prefer is to help them feel confident about the material. If they're confused by some of the words, we've got the glossary there. We have an FAQ, and it helps grown-ups feel confident. Like they don't, it's one of the things that we find in children's museums specifically is that grown-ups will be able to they'll be much more likely to spend time in an exhibit that they feel like they can take on these different roles, including facilitation roles. And they might even just avoid this exhibit altogether if they aren't getting any of this help. So having those kind of resources in the gallery was one of the strategies that we used. We also made sure that the staff was comfortable. We wanted to make sure that staff could have conversations in that space and feel good about it. And so part of that was including an FAQ for staff, and we did a Trans 101 training. And this last piece, rethinking content warnings. I think this is so important. I am a proponent for content warnings. I think content warnings are great when they're used correctly. And when I say correctly, I mean like empathetically, thoughtfully, with an understanding of how systemic oppression affects visitors and staff members too. So it's really important not to put content warnings on queer content because that's stigmatizing. And it happens. So any kind of like, if it says parental guidance or content warning or just warning in front of your queer exhibit that was developed with this age group in mind, like that's such an upsetting, completely deflating thing to experience. When we were developing Mimi's Family, this came up as something that leadership was interested in including a content warning. It was so buoying as a genderqueer person on staff who is developing this exhibit and feeling very vulnerable to have the entire education team create this anti-content warning, actually, that I wanted to share with you. I am going to read it out loud because I think it is such a great example of thinking of how to really stand behind your content and speak back to anybody who might, have wanted a content warning, just, for any reason, but I'll just read it to you now. A note from the educators. Boston Children's Museum is committed to helping children develop a strong foundation of knowledge and skills that can contribute to their ability to navigate a wide range of experiences over time. We work to support an inclusive community across all our exhibits and programs. Within the safe and accessible context of a children's museum, Mimi's Family offers important opportunities for us to support our visitors who see themselves reflected in the exhibit and foster perspective-taking, empathy, and understanding in developmentally appropriate ways. Thank you for visiting. We hope you enjoy the exhibit. A few things that they're doing in that note are emphasizing their expertise as educators who focus on children under 10, and that this is something that they know about, they're experts on, and they approve this content. And so instead of stigmatizing visitors and staff with a content warning, this is what we have instead, a note that I think really embodies that idea of active welcome as well. Something else that's happening here is talking about the mission of the museum. Most mission statements for museums are written in such a vague way that you could probably use them to justify anything that you're doing in the museum, but that doesn't mean that it's not still a really valuable thing to remind visitors and staff about. Like, this is what we do. This is something that's important to us. These are our stated values, and here's how this content is a reflection of those values. And that really helps. I think it was helpful in reassuring visitors that like this is part of what we do, and it's also really helpful for other staff members to feel like bolstered in that. I certainly found it bolstering. So those are the 3 strategies. So what I'd like to finish up with is envisioning a queer future of family friendly. Maybe instead of using this term family friendly, we come up with all of these different words or phrases to describe what it is that we want to do, specifically around being inclusive of people of all ages, including young children, and thinking about queer content for people of all ages, including young children. So I'm asking us to re-examine the dominant narrative. Think critically about who we mean when we're talking about families and the assumptions that we make about what they need. Because I think we can stereotype really easily if we don't think about that critically. And then rewriting the narrative. Let's create queer museum content that's especially for children and their grown-ups. I think that would speak so much, to specifically like to this like really rough political environment that we're in. If museums can get a little braver and rewrite this narrative that queer content isn't for young children. It's for everybody, and let's make that happen. So, like I was talking about in the beginning, I find it really helpful when I'm making an argument or engaging in some of this persuasive work to cite other people's research. All of what I've shown you today, I've cited in a chapter that I wrote for this book. I'm offering you the QR code. So if you want to go to directly to the publishers to get the link for this book, it's called Storytelling in Museums. It's an edited volume and it came out a few years ago. All of the other chapters are really wonderful too. It really runs a really wide, there's a really wide variety of different things. My chapter is specifically about what I talk about in this presentation. So, if your museum has funds to buy books, this can be a really good way to, if you want to cite this or some of the citations that I make, that can really help make your point to your colleagues, and maybe take some of the heat off of yourself if you are a queer museum professional who maybe isn't in a leadership position and is vulnerable when making these persuasive arguments. A good strategy is to widen out the blame and be in community. So this is my contact information. Most of my writing, not book chapters, but everything else I put up on my website. So feel free to go there and read more and be in touch with me. And it looks like we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'm gonna, if you've all had a chance to write down, or I can pop it in the chat actually. Oh, thank you. Cesare already did that for me. So great. So we've got the link to Storytelling in Museums and my website. And I will rejoin you all.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That was brilliant to see, and for the links, and Cesare, as always, for seamlessly just providing the information and links into the chat. That's brilliant. As Margaret says, we do have time for questions. Do put your comments, questions, feedback in the chat. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. 12 on the dot. I hope you're all more comfortable. I imagine some of you have grabbed lunch and are enjoying your sandwiches as we're moving into our case study session. Thanks again to Margaret, who's been contributing to the discussion over the break in the chat. We're now going to head to the National Archives, and I can see Vicky and Amy popping up here. So we're joined by Vicky Iglewarski-Broad, who's Principal Record Specialist in Diverse Histories at the National Archives. Vicky researches marginalised histories within government collections and works to promote these stories to traditionally underrepresented audiences. You can see that Vicky's also joined by Amy Marr, who's an events producer at the National Archives. Amy's been working in GLAM public programming for over 10 years, both in the UK and in New Zealand. And together they're going to talk to us about their Colours of Pride Family Day. We're hoping that we will also have time at the end of their presentation for some questions. So as we go through, stick them in the chat, or save them in the end, put them in there, and we'll try and get to them at the end. So I'll hand over to Vicky and Amy.
So it's really lovely to be here today. So I guess we just wanted to say hi. You've introduced us already, but yeah, we're Amy and Vicky. And I wanted to give some collections context first, because we've got a very unique kind of context in many ways, partly to do with our collections, but also to do with just the organisation and why we exist. So we are a non-ministerial department and the official archive and publisher of the UK government and for England and Wales. So we're kind of very much a government organisation. We have over 1,000 years of iconic national collections, and we reckon around 12 million documents. So the scale of our collections is really quite epic, quite overwhelming. That presents lots of challenges in itself. And what frames our records is this kind of government interest historically. So everything that we have in some way has historically been of interest to government. And so sometimes finding the voices of more kind of individuals or more marginalised individuals, it is a challenge. But we have really exciting things. So we have everything from the Doomsday Book, we have copies of Magna Carta, we have kind of government artworks. We increasingly archive born digital material, things like government Twitter feeds. So it is a really exciting collection. But what we do find is that the majority of our collections were not preserved with the intention of kind of representing LGBTQ plus lives. It's very much about government functions historically, and these were used as working documents in government departments. Historically, there was moments of fraught relationships between the state and people we might now see as LGBTQ plus, and those kind of tensions are reflected in the archive. We often don't know how people would identify in their own words. These kind of identities have changed over time, the language has changed over time, and so that can be a bit of a challenge as well. And there can be a natural distrust of us as an organisation, because of historic or current government attitudes and treatment of queer people. And so we have kind of quite a few barriers potentially to overcome in engaging people. And yet we have incredible collections, a real wonderful wealth of material. And these collections offer centuries of archival visibility for historically underrepresented people, despite all those highlighted tensions. So we really have a responsibility, I think, to share this history, despite some of the barriers that we do come across. And just to give some examples of the kind of material that we do have, we have everything from kind of copies of items relating to Chevalier d'Eon, one of the kind of earliest examples of a gender non-conforming individual in our collections. They live part of their life seemingly as a man, part of their life as a woman, and we have their calling card. We have wills relating to iconic lesbian individuals and kind of iconic lesbian duos. So we have the wills of Anne Lister and Anne Walker. We have the wills of the ladies of Llangollen, individuals whose relationships might not have been so heavily preserved in other places because of the context of the time they were living in, but actually wills give us quite an intimate insight into them. We have amazing records about queer spaces, particularly from the 20s and 30s. So as Rachel will be well aware, we've done work around the Caravan Club and recreating some of these spaces, creating welcoming spaces for kind of queer audiences now based on these historic records. but they come to us through difficult contexts around policing and surveillance of these communities historically. And then we have records around kind of public health campaigns, things like the HIV/AIDS epidemic. So that's just a poster from the Terence Higgins Trust on screen, which is trying to reframe some of the kind of language of the time to be more positive in terms of representation for younger gay people because of all the stigma around that at the time. So incredible collections, but very much loaded with this state context and complexity around kind of the policing of LGBT lives. So we were very aware going into this event that there were going to be some challenges, but that we were really keen to hold a space for LGBT family audiences. But it was all quite new to us. So Amy, I can pass over to you.
Please, thank you. So family programming at the National Archives is developed and delivered by both our education team and the events team where I sit, with support from our collection experts like Vicky, and often from other teams at TNA like Collections Care. So we've been running hands-on document workshops and storytelling as part of our Time Travel Club brand for a few years now, and also school holiday crafting and things prior to COVID. But since COVID, we've been really trying hard to grow our family offer and make the archives a more welcoming and engaging space for families and children. So alongside our traditional offer, we've been running a program series called the Ministry of Time Travel, which is sort of half escape room, half digital trail. And we held our first exhibition focused on children, developed, co-curated by children from the local primary school called The Spirit of Invention, and that looked at our design registers from the Victorian era. And that exhibition was supported by STEM workshops that combined inventing and building with our records, and we had a big family festival takeover for that, and smaller themed family days. So the family programming for the exhibition had about over 2,000 visitors, which for us is amazing. So we've been really working hard at the family audience, and this year coming up, we didn't actually have an exhibition on over summer, but we wanted to continue to make sure we were offering family events to continue, to keep the family audience we'd developed, but also reach more families. So the nice thing about not having an exhibition on was that we had real freedom to pick what we wanted to do. And I had been hoping to do a Pride Family Day for a while, and it seemed like this year would be perfect. So I spoke to Vicky and asked if she'd have capacity to help us develop and deliver a Pride Family offer involving decorating our windows with clear coloured vinyl. So there's a picture there that's from a previous art gallery I've worked at in New Zealand. We ran the activity, and at the archives we do have a lot of windows, so I thought it would be a perfect combo. And then I had to get proposing to the wider event team, and then the events and exhibition team, and finally the head of public engagement. And apart from some small changes to the blurb you can see on screen, the day we were able to run was pretty similar, and there was support throughout our division to deliver the day, which was really exciting. So the event offer was, we did run the vinyl window project. So that was basically a collaborative installation where families were given a pack of vinyl and a window, and they were tasked with transforming the National Archives into a rainbow coloured stained glass masterpiece. And the vinyl is still up now. And we also worked with Ollie Pike from Pop and Ollie, who's already been mentioned this morning, on our crafts for the day, and he made pride flags and crowns, and they also ran storytelling and song sessions in our auditorium, and that was a focus on stories that celebrated the joy of diversity and difference and everything that makes people unique. Families could also take part in making rainbow kaleidoscopes and butterflies and rainbows with origami artist Toshiko Kurata, and they could also design their own colourful cotton bag to take home using waste vinyl and a heat press. And Vicky compiled and ran a document display highlighting some of the incredible LGBTQ+ individuals who feature in our collection and the spaces and identities they created for themselves. So we worked with our education team very closely to make the labels for this family-friendly display, and employed discussion points on the labels to help parents speak to their children about the documents. And of course, there was face painting. So we always have a few general event challenges when we try to run anything at TNA, and it's not just for our family events. most people don't really know that the archives runs events, let alone events for families. And we find that sometimes our location and queue, which sees less casual visitors compared to a lot of other organisations in London, makes us not a top priority for visitors, and also sometimes hard to reach if the district line is down. And you will have seen our building at the start of the presentation. It's not the friendliest looking building, and sometimes it can also look like it might not be open. So so those are just some general challenges we have. And we also had some additional challenges this year in that our marketing team was in a period of change, and the support we'd normally expect to promote an event like this wasn't available. And as this one was kind of a pilot event, we were really depending on that to help us spread the word.
So we have a very particular, unique context here, as I kind of mentioned. So we are a government organisation, and we have a duty because of that to be impartial. And we also have to work within kind of the law and legal framework, like the Equality Act. So there's lots of kind of things to navigate that kind of maybe sometimes pull us in different directions. And what does impartiality even mean in the context of the collections I've talked about, which are loaded in all these kind of historical biases? So there's quite a lot that kind of challenges us sometimes with that kind of thing. However, we do have an organisational strategy, Archives for Everyone, signed off by ministers, that is all about reaching traditionally underserved audiences, breaking down barriers and teasing out the relevance of our collections to as many people as possible. So this kind of inclusive archive ethos in our strategy fully backs this kind of activity. So we were motivated to do this. Internally, we were aware of the backlash other organisations had faced in programming these kind of events, and that's already been touched on a little bit today. So that was kind of very much in the background of us kind of trying to create this event. And we know we can be quite a risk-averse organisation. We're a big organisation, and that kind of government context doesn't help with that. So because of this, there was some kind of nervousness about putting on the event, but very much with a concern around safeguarding. So safeguarding audiences, safeguarding staff, and also our contractors. So that was really the kind of primary concern about putting it on. We didn't face any other internal backlash, and none of this was enough to stop us doing the event. But it did mean we had some things to address around safeguarding. So we really did that by having a lot of kind of due process in place, doing risk assessments, and just trying our best to make sure everyone felt safe and welcomed. And one of the contractors actually said it was like the most thorough and professional event briefing they'd ever had. So we kind of maybe went overboard with that, but I think for good reason. And it was good to have that all really well thought through in case we did have any actual problematic encounters running the event. We did create a slightly smaller scale event than we would have liked to kind of prove the concept, and I think that was a good thing. It actually still ended up being pretty big and multiple things happening, but we kind of plan to then build on that. Kind of other complexities we face as a government department. We aim to be agile, but that can be challenging in a big organisation. So there's always a lot of process to putting on new things. And it was also the pre-election period it ended up being. So initially we'd planned this event for Pride to increase the kind of topicality and promotion. We already had it listed on Eventbrite and our website with tickets sold. But when the general election was called, and as a government organisation, all our activity had to stop. So we had to take the event offline and change the date to the first weekend of September, away from Pride in London. And the new date then clashed with the start of the school year. So clearly parents were a little bit focused elsewhere. But as has already been mentioned, it's really important to have this stuff all year round. So in that way, it was kind of a positive thing, but maybe meant there was slightly less promotion around it and visibility to it. So yeah, over to Amy.
Yes, so the day did go ahead in September, but it was a bit touch and go. And it wasn't anything around to do the theme or the topic, but it was more for us that because I think the new date was so close to schools going back that ticket sales were slower than expected. And we were now opening, especially on a Sunday for the event, which meant there were higher overheads than previously expected. So Vicky and I were just talking before that actually if it had been maybe an event that wasn't Pride related or for LGBTQ plus audiences, it might have been cancelled cancelled, but the fact it was actually the reason we went ahead. Promotion and social media posts were limited, and there were some concerns internally about negative comments on social media content that was sort of raised later on, but not totally unfounded. And I think as a risk-averse organisation, there were these initial thoughts to cancel when ticket sales were slow, but we decided to be bold and hold out and go ahead with the event anyway, because it was an event. As an organisation, we were really proud to be hosting it. And we wanted it to be successful. So in the end, 89 tickets were sold prior to the event, and the day was really successful despite the challenges outlined, and actually saw an increase rather than a dropout of visitors on the day, which we normally see about a 20% dropout, but for this we ended up with about 120 attendees. And we'd initially aimed for about 200, so we were calling it a victory. And there were some really wonderful, these are some of the vinyl creations that were made on the day, and they're all still up at the moment, and they were only supposed to be up till October, but everyone's liked them so much that we're probably going to keep them up for the foreseeable, I think. Skip forward. But the planning of the event and the delivery has provided some really great learnings for future LGBTQ plus and Pride-focused events. Firstly, it was really great to see that this was a pilot event for our audience in a way. We know they come to our family days since COVID, but we didn't know if they were going to be fully receptive to the topic of this. But it seemed that they were really, really happy, and they enjoyed attending the Pride Day. There were no concerns raised. Nobody raised any qualms about the topic. And the audience, I think, just approached it as if it was any of our other events for children. And we were hoping this would be the case, and it was great to see that it was. It's hard to say too many specifics about the audience, though, as we didn't ask specifically on our post-event surveys about sort of the makeups of families. Did we reach the LGBTQ plus family audience we were hoping to reach? But the feeling is we may not have exactly reached that new audience.
Yeah, so in terms of promotion for the event, we relied on local LGBT organisations to promote the event, especially family groups. We have the wonderful West London Queer Project that's really successful in the area, and so we kind of leaned on them a lot. We really relied on our own staff network, LGBT staff network, but also Kew Gardens network. So we created lots of contacts, and actually some of them for the first time, because really this kind of this audience was a little bit different for us. We do a lot of LGBT programming, but largely for adult audiences. So we were really trying to find that audience. So all those connections will help us in the future. But as Amy said, we're not quite sure if we successfully reached them through our first run of the event. But we hope to build towards that. We both pulled in every favour we could. We were determined not to have the event cancelled. So yeah, sorry to anyone who may be attending today that I emailed in a panic. There were certainly a lot of people. But I guess what I'd say is there is a lovely support network of peers that all want to see this work succeed. And I got a lot of strength from the messages of support that I got back from people. And it did really help us put on the event in the end. So if you are doing this work, lean on kind of networks, because everyone wants this work to go well and to develop more. So I'm just going to talk quickly about a few other challenges that we've got. So as Amy mentioned, we had a great programme of activity, including this document display that we had. And we really wanted to root what we were doing in the archive material. It's kind of why it's so relevant and important for us to be doing this kind of incredible archival visibility that we have over centuries. But we did also feel like if we did get any backlash, it was a real reason for us to be doing this. We do have these records, and so that was also important to us. Given the challenges of the records we hold, the kind of trauma sometimes we have in the records, we went for a person-centred approach on the display, very much trying to highlight individuals historically. And the format was quite a conventional document display with a selection of archival documents and child-friendly captions that our education team supported with. We tried to look for a visual range of items and a range of records, so it was all kind of interesting. Margaret's presentation had me having so many thoughts, and I was thinking, I guess there was a kind of bit of thinking about what's acceptable and suitable for children, and that was never really about sexuality or gender, but it was about the trauma in the records and what level do we show, but equally not trying to flatten historic experiences or censor what people have went through. So there were some kind of challenging decisions made, and challenging decisions in how we kind of set the context in these captions as well. So ultimately, the engagement in this display was mainly from adults, less so on children. So I guess our takeaways from that are that it was still really positive to engage adults. So it was kind of added value for parents or carers attending the event. It was difficult to compete with the more obviously exciting and child-friendly activities, and that's okay. But we need to think more about how we ingrain our records into those other activities. In the future, we would simplify the number of documents. I was definitely too enthusiastic, and make it really explicit that children are welcome in the space, and like really push that message. Maybe try and make it a bit visual and exciting to approach, although we did have pride coloured lights that were kind of framing the space. So hopefully that helped a little bit. We're also thinking about maybe a one document display, so that maybe at the end of a session, a story session or something, one document comes out and everyone looks at it, and that's a way of kind of engaging as well. So ultimately, we need to think a little bit more about this, think about how to break down these kind of archival barriers. I guess archives are really thought about as quiet spaces and a lot of things that are kind of not very child friendly. So we really need to think a little bit more about that. But ultimately, it was good to still have the archival material there. So I might just skip over some of this, but essentially, as Amy said, we've still got these lovely images up on the wall. So it's giving us kind of legacy and visibility to the event we held and causing a lot of conversations. This has kind of come up already a little bit, but one of the challenges is images to promote this event, because it is so hard to kind of go through the process of getting permissions for children and adults. So that's definitely challenging in terms of our marketing, and we want to think more about evaluation and how we can do that in a family friendly way. People are unlikely to want to sit down with a long form, and we certainly felt that. So we want to really work on that. So ultimately, we were really pleased with how the event went, and the engagement was brilliant, but it is something we want to build on now or more. So we've experimented with our first kind of ever event, but we're now looking to consult with local LGBT family audiences and local organisations that work in this area. So we've got some meetings already lined up for next year to try and focus on that. We'd also like to take maybe a lighter touch, but more continued engagement approach to kind of act as a safe community space, build trust and learn what people want. So maybe more kind of continued programming, but with less kind of resource put into it, but as a way that we can build those relationships. And our plan is also to weave inclusion themes throughout all our other events, so they're not standalone. We do that to some extent already, but I guess we want to be even more mindful of that going forward. So Amy's got some plans of how to do that. So in conclusion, in our experience, the fear of backlash was much more present than the actual backlash. So if you do need evidence of how events like this have gone, feel free to use it as a case study. I think it's always useful, like Margaret was saying, to have evidence of how these kind of things went at other organisations. It is important to make sure you have process and risk assessments in place, because the safeguarding element is so important to make sure audiences don't end up feeling alienated by what you're doing. If you need to build internal support and trust, I think it's good to start small and prove the concept and build from there, show that there's interest. You don't necessarily need lots of money. It could just be about creating a space. And something we haven't done yet, but we're keen to, I think, definitely consult audiences if you can and work towards what they need. And kind of be fun and joyful. Archives and heritage are for everyone, including children and families, and archives can be spaces of joy, play and learning. And yeah, we really wanted to get that across with our event. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you for being so honest about the sort of lessons learned and like things that you, like the process and the behind the scenes elements of the event. I love the way that you talked about the collection. I think actually you can sort of feel that desire to root the engagement in the collection in the presence of both of you here and the way that you work together on it, and that's really lovely to see. And I'm very conscious that we are hitting past now, so I just want to say another huge thank you to all of our speakers, as well as people who've put comments and questions in the chat, and of course a massive thanks to Cesare for keeping us all right and having things run smoothly. Just to build on something that Margaret said sort of earlier, I think as a network, we're all very mindful that people who attend networks like this tend to be advocates within your own organizations and spaces. And we want to empower you to make the case for queer inclusion wherever possible. And we're really welcome input into the network and feedback. So just reach out through the website or email address. That is always welcome. All the presentations today have been recorded and will be available on the website.